Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the AMPLIFY Girls of the Longitudinal Results. We are happy to see you all and to welcome everyone who did not have a chance to join us on Tuesday. Now, a quick recap for you. On Tuesday, we came together with other high-level practitioners from Women Deliver, ICRW, Akira Chicks, the Population Council, and UNFPA to unpack our contextual understanding and recommendations for building and investing in girls' agency. A few key points to note is that we came to understand that we need to be more intentional about girls' agency, that investing the human side of girls' interventions translates to the economic empowerment of girls. In addition, we need better metrics to measure the impact of girls' programs on girls and actually use these metrics. We need dedicated funding to collaborate, get in the room, and share ideas, and have these kinds of discussions about best practices in girls' programming. Lastly, we said that empowerment is at the center of women's autonomy. We need interventions that respond to women's and girls' needs. Now, today, we are here to launch the Girls Agency Longitudinal Results, developed together with our partners, community-driven organizations in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania. To start us off and provide opening remarks is Ms. Victoria Agibatoyo, who is the lead regional partnerships for GPE in Africa and Asia Pacific. At the Global Partnership for Education, Ms. Victoria is the regional lead and representative to the African Union. She leads GPE's strategic partnership with multilateral development banks, regional organizations, and civil society in Africa and Asia Pacific to ensure strong support for education transformation in GPE partner countries, further public policy discourse at country level, and mobilize better financing for education and for GPE. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Anika. It's a pleasure to be delivering this keynote on behalf of the Global Partnership for Education, GPE, and to be amongst esteemed colleagues at Amplify Girls and Echidna Giving, and also our colleagues who were on the previous panel a few days prior. Thank you for bringing us all here today and hosting this symposium to talk about recognizing the importance of measuring girls' agency in advancing gender equality across sectors. This event is key in highlighting the critical role played by local organizations and local programming on girls' agency, and that community-driven organizations are as well positioned as transnational actors to drive progress towards global development agendas, including gender equality to, in, and through education. We hold this event on the cusp of the UN Secretary General's Transforming Education Summit. But the truth is, we can't transform education systems without putting gender equality at the center. Gender equality must not be lost as a key goal in transforming education systems, particularly after the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on girls' vulnerability and learning, and in the face of current and multiple overlapping crises, from economic upheavals, wars, humanitarian disasters, and climate change. Education systems are pushed to the brink and governments face hard choices on resourcing. For GPE, putting gender at the center of education means making education systems gender transformative. This means harnessing the full potential of education to transform attitudes and practices within and beyond the education system, to contribute to gender justice for all children, regardless of gender, but particularly girls in many contexts. Gender equality requires social transformation that can only be driven by addressing structural inequities and behaviors across society and the economy. Now, every year is critical for girls' education, but particularly since the onset of the pandemic. Nearly 130 million girls were out of school before the COVID-19 pandemic, and 20 million more girls risked being out of school by the time it ends. So the urgency remains big. And we know social norms is a key barrier to girls' education. So as world leaders begin rebuilding from the pandemic, GPE will play a vital role in ensuring gender equality is at the heart of their plans, building on the historic global momentum on education from our Global Education Summit in London in July, co-hosted by the UK and Kenya, to the Transforming Education Summit kicking off this week. GPE is the largest global fund dedicated solely to transforming education across the world, and is a unique multi-stakeholder partnership. We work with our country partners to transform education systems and reach the most marginalized and vulnerable children, particularly girls. Gender equality is at the heart of our new strategy, GPE 2025, and our approach to transform education. GPE's commitment to gender equality is hardwired into everything we do, funding ministries of education, evidence generation, supporting civil society and advocacy like this today, and building political will. We work with partner countries to diagnose and address reform priorities, which reduce gender inequalities to, within, and through education. From addressing violence in schools to tracking gender stereotypes in curricula. GPE is helping partner countries to make education systems genuinely transformative and ensure gender equality for future generations. We leverage the full breadth of our partnership behind breaking down gender barriers. For example, our knowledge and innovation exchange is supporting countries to include gender transformative teaching methods into teacher training and to generate other forms of evidence for policymaking. GPE's Education Out Loud Fund supports civil society organizations focused on gender equality to amplify their voices in policy dialogues. And our Girls Education Accelerator supports girls to attend school and learn in countries where marginalized girls face the biggest challenges in accessing, learning, and thriving through education. GPE is also pleased to support the Freetown Manifesto, launched by the government of Sierra Leone and Niger in partnership with the UN Girls Education Initiative, who have led the process and sign-ons, and we encourage more partners and countries to also sign on through the Transforming Education Summit process. As we do all this, gender equality to, within, and through education is fundamentally about building agency, as creating gender inequitable learning experience underpins a more gender equitable society, and one in which women contribute much more significantly to politics, the economy, society, and which accelerates the achievement of the SDGs. Increasingly, for girls' education, it's acknowledged that improving outcomes for girls in low-resource settings requires content related to gender and power and sexual and reproductive health and rights as core to a girl's successful future. Achieving the outcomes we need on girls' education and eliminating the barriers to achieving this requires a broad-based approach on gender equality. For girls around the world to lead healthy, safe, educated lives and be empowered to achieve their full potential, we must build more evidence of what it takes to build their agency. So it was a smart and innovative approach for the AMPLIFY Girls study on tracking girls' agency to use a quantitative approach to measure this agency. In doing so, the research also highlights the impact of focusing on the most marginalized girls and therefore demonstrating the significant amplifying effect on gender inequality when linked to socioeconomic disadvantage and other areas of disadvantage. The research also demonstrates that gender norms have a significant impact on girls and the ability to translate interventions into wider claims we often make and we often put on investing in women and girls. So more work is needed on understanding better interventions and the most effective ways to impact these, so we can then state concrete connections between girls' education, the environment, health outcomes, and other areas. The research also raises big questions: how to bring learning from localized approaches into national level policy dialogue. And while targeted programming on marginalized girls is much needed, longer term work engaging men and boys, particularly in marginalized contexts, could be needed for sustainability. The research is indeed timely, and if anything, the COVID-19 pandemic further accentuated the need for a paradigm shift towards localization as lockdowns and travel restrictions curtailed the role of larger scale international actors. And in relation to GPE 2025, our strategy and operating model, and our gender hardwiring, The AMPLIFY Girls research highlights the importance of inclusive dialogue, which includes actors and agencies with this deep localized knowledge, and reinforces the importance of understanding more, of which this work contributes, the pathway or theory of change on gender equality through education, particularly for the most marginalized girls, as we engage in policy dialogue with countries on gender hardwiring. We must recognize girls' agency is a measure that exists and has cross-sectoral importance that we must continue to measure, and that creating partnerships across stakeholders is crucial if we want to measure the success of programs. And if we want to measure the success of programs, then we must talk about how they are building girls' agency and invest in this work and be intentional about it going forward. So with these few remarks, I want to thank you again for inviting GPE to deliver these keynote speech and wish you every success in the rest of the program today. Thank you, Anika.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for those sterling remarks. We feel very glad and fortunate to have you here as the overall representative for Coalition of Governments on Education and various civil societies and specific local education groups. We are cognizant of the ripple effects of your presence at this forum. Now to the gist, the heart and the core of this two-part symposium, the presentation and the results of the study titled Tracking Girls' Agency, an outcome evaluation of diverse programming amongst community-driven organizations in East Africa. As explained to you before, we, the various partners of AMPLIFY Girls, came together and offered an opportunity to collaboratively demonstrate the impact of community-driven organizations in serving adolescent girls in this sector. Now, they envisioned a world where development is local and community-driven organizations are leading global change. So together they undertook this important initiative to measure the impact of AMPLIFY Girls membership on adolescent well-being. An agency was identified by a diverse set of community-driven organizations as a key factor in the lives of adolescent girls. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to bring in Ms. Erin Ganju and Dr. Aubrey Siddle, together with Dr. Brenda Olo, to take us through the journey that is Girls Agency. Erin, who will be a moderator and session chair for our next part, is the managing director at Echidna Giving, one of the largest private funders in girls' education in lower income countries. Erin manages Echidna Giving's portfolio of grantees in life skills, advocacy, and supporting local leaders in girls' education. Dr. Aubrey Siddle is the AMPLIFY Girls Head of Research and Director of the Girls Agency Lab. She has led several multi-country studies focused on the practice and measurement of adolescent girls' agency. They are joined by Dr. Brenda Olo, who's the co-investigator in this research and the Deputy Director of the Girls Agency Lab. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much, Anika, and I'm very excited to be here in community with all of you, particularly with Aubrey and Brenda. I think really, it is a testament to the wonderful and incredible work that AMPLIFY Girls is doing in this space, has brought together so many strong community-driven partners in launching this work that makes it of such interest to the broader international development community that we all represent here today. So it's wonderful to have you all join us, and I'm excited to dig in and learn more. I hope that you can stay towards the end because we will be making some interesting announcements on the work and where it is going in the future. But of course, we must start at the beginning. So let's hear, Aubrey, from you a little bit about what AMPLIFY Girls is and how did AMPLIFY really identify agency as an important outcome.
Great, thank you, Erin, and so excited to be here with all of you today to share our learning on girls' agency. So I'll start a little bit at the beginning, so I hope you forgive me. But AMPLIFY Girls is really a network and a collective of community-driven organizations in 4 countries in East Africa, in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. And we came together a number of years ago to really solve this problem and question of how community-driven organizations who have innovative approaches for serving girls could leverage their collective power to access more resources and voice in global policy making arenas. And so This early mission quickly led to the need to document collective impact, and it became clear again early on that we would need a shared set of metrics to do that. So I actually love to tell the story of how Amplify Girls settled on agency, because as a former practitioner myself, I've always been interested in the power and potential of agency for young people. I kind of think of it as the secret sauce, to quote my colleague Margaret, or the magic behind what helps young people translate opportunities and resources into real life change in their lives. So in 2018, Amplify Girls had about 18 partner organizations. And we much as now, these organizations represented a really wide range of diversity of programs. So we had organizations who focused on vocational training for girls, formal schooling initiatives, life skills and leadership programs, and those that were operating in the realm more of economic empowerment. So how to distill shared metrics across this diversity was a bit of a challenge. We used a participatory and mixed methodological tool called group concept mapping, which essentially takes qualitative feedback, sort of the diverse perspectives of a lot of different stakeholders, uses both quantitative and qualitative analysis to make sense of that diversity of opinion and kind of map it into a visual geography that we could all look at and pick apart and really distill learning from. And what came out of that process were 4 shared metrics and unanimous agreement from all of the 18 partner organizations and leaders at the table that girls' agency was the #1 most important outcome for girls in their community. And I think that was a really profound moment for all of us. It was exciting, one, that there was consensus. And I think it just really speaks to the power and potential of girls' agency as a real force for change.
Wonderful. That sounds like a really rich experience working with these important community-driven organizations. I know many of us here today have struggled with the difficulty in measuring agency. So I think it would be wonderful if we could dive in a little bit on how do you measure agency and what is the uniqueness, maybe also about your measure that you're developing at Amplify?
Yeah, great question. Agency is indeed very difficult to measure. I think there is no perfect measure out there. We've worked hard in the last couple of years to develop a measure, and our measure defines agency as 4 domains or 4 buckets of things. We call those self-beliefs, environmental beliefs, self-governance skills, and leadership skills. So I like to translate that for people as, in our understanding of agency, girls must believe in their own skills and abilities. They must believe that their environment can be changed, and that's principally related to their beliefs about gendered norms and how rigidly their environment is structured by those norms. They must have the skills to coordinate their own abilities into action, we call self-governance skills, and they must have the skills to influence others, or leadership skills. So that's how we define it. And we came to that definition through an intensive process that took more than a year, where we developed this survey through collaboration with our 18 organizational partners. They told us what skills and beliefs constituted agency in their settings. We scoured the literature for pre-existing measures of those skills and beliefs that had been validated in other contexts. We developed some of our own questions. We piloted early versions of the survey in a few of our countries. We spoke to girls about agency, and then we held workshops with our partner organizations where they reviewed the survey in detail. They looked at how we were defining skills and beliefs, made sure those definitions were relevant and accurate for their settings, looked at each question and how each skill and belief was measured. And as you can imagine, that produced several versions of the survey, several revisions, I should say, which we then conducted an early validation study and an investigation of specifically the construct validity of this definition. So does our measure understanding agency as these 4 domains, is that an accurate measure of agency? Is this reflected in the data and how girls understand it? And we actually have a paper forthcoming in the Comparative Education Review on that early research work. But getting to the second point of your question, how is our instrument unique? So I think there's several ways in which it's unique. First, it's developed specifically for adolescent girls. Many measures that operationalize agency as decision-making in a particular domain of life or livelihood. And many of these domains are really only relevant to adult women and not necessarily to adolescent girls, although there are a few out there for girls specifically. But I think another thing which distinguishes our measure is that it attempts to directly measure the underlying psychological capacities that make up agency. So it's not a proxy measure. It is a comprehensive view of agency as an underlying psychological construct. And third, it's the only measure we know of to be developed by community practitioners in East Africa, right? So we're having all these conversations in the global space about how we make sure that our measures are culturally relevant, contextually relevant. And our measure was developed by community-driven organizations and their leaders in the settings where it will be used. And then last but not least, it attempts to account for girls' understanding of the structural constraints she faces. So I think in a lot of conversations about agency, we all know that girls' ability to exercise her agency is limited by the very real constraints in her environment. So structural systems which constrain the types of decisions that she has and the ways in which she can act. And while our measure doesn't objectively look at structure or attempt to measure structure itself, we ask girls to tell us how they view the structural constraints in their life. And I think that's unique. And I think it's important too, because agency, as much as it can be constrained by structural forces, it also implies that girls have some ability, right, to influence those structures too. So I think our measure is distinguished in those ways.
Wonderful, that's great. I know on the Tuesday call, a lot of trying to understand this uniqueness and that importance of the context came up. And so it's really great to be able to dig into that and understand that more. It would be great, Aubryn, and also Brenda, to bring you into the conversation to hear a little bit more about Amplify's programs, because they are quite diverse, as we know. And I think it would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about how the study design and how you accounted for this diversity, because I think this is something that all of us in the audience, have our own experiences with. We would love to hear more about how you guys really tackled and approached this diversity and made it such an important part of your work.
Yeah. Great. I'll start and then I'll pass to my better half. So at the high level, we used a longitudinal design, meaning that we followed the same participants over the course of their program and captured their agency scores at 2 different points in time and then compared them baseline to end line. And in our final study, we had, I would say, 3 broad categories of programming, those that kind of operated outside school settings, programs that operated themselves low or no cost private schools for vulnerable girls alongside a host of other services, and programs that provided school-based interventions, usually in the after-school space. And all of these programs operated for varying lengths of time. So we had programs that operated from 3 months to 12 months in our study. And while this diversity is certainly a challenge and a limitation of our study design, it also posed a unique opportunity to learn about the impact and influence of different program structures and how those influence agency. So specifically, we were interested in program duration and dosage, and hypothesized that both of those things would matter for agency outcomes. So we started by comparing baseline and end line scores of agency across our entire cohort. We broke that down by dosage category and looked to see what the gains were in each dosage category. And then we modeled the effects of program dosage, duration, girls' age, and their baseline agency score on their actual change in agency over time, using something called a country fixed effects regression model, which basically means that we were able to control or hold constant the effects of country on girls' agency outcomes, so that the effects we were seeing in our model were the effects of the variables in the model, such as dosage and program duration, after accounting for any differences due to the country of operation. So that's sort of our starting point. I'm going to pass now to Brenda to talk a little bit more about that and how we looked at these variables in combination.
Yeah, thank you, Aubrey. I was waiting for, for this opportunity to talk about the design. So we did, as Aubrey has mentioned, we were able to look at both the univariate effects, and by this we mean the effect of all the single variables that Aubrey has mentioned. So age, program duration, program dosage, which we defined based on the contact hours of each program that girls have to go through in a year's period. And basically modeled each in the univariate model. So each effect on agents and on the change of agency. But because we know that things there's nothing that's in isolation. There's no variable that affects the other in isolation. So many other things affect, the effect of something. We then modeled this together and thought, wait, does it then matter if they're all starting at different levels of agency, because the programs are so diverse and how you get into the program is also so different. So girls are getting into these various programs with different levels of agency. And we thought, what if we accounted for the level of agency that a girl is getting into the program with? So the baseline agency, does then this affect how the other variables affect the change of agency? And we saw that to be very interesting, because if you don't account for maybe I'm jumping ahead to results, but we saw we found this to be quite an interesting aspect to consider in how we looked at the relationship between various variables in our model and the change of agency. I think when we get to the results, I'll be very keen to speak about how interesting this was, but that was the study design. And as Aubrey has mentioned, the diversity of programming, even though this was a challenge, was a very unique opportunity to be able to assess something like program dosage, just how much contact is suitable to be able to produce larger gains in agency. Yeah.
Wonderful, Brenda. Well, you're taking us exactly where we want to be going. I want to encourage everyone listening to please continue to ask questions in the chat. We'll have time at the end with Aubrey and Brenda to dig into some of them, because I know we're already getting into a lot of the richness and the detail. We wanted to start with sort of the beginning and how Amplify works and some of the focus on the program design, but we definitely want to hear now and have you share, Brenda, what some of the key findings are. You're talking about a lot of interesting things around dosage and duration and age and baseline agency scores. So we'd love to hear, what you are seeing in some of the findings from the study and to dig in more to that.
Great. Yeah, I was jumping ahead of myself. It's just so exciting to talk about.
Exactly.
So when we modeled this, it was quite interesting to see that when we accounted for the baseline agency that a girl was getting into a program with, the duration or the type of programs that were producing the largest gains were programs that we categorized as medium dosage. And by medium dosage, the programs that fell into this bucket were programs that basically meet regularly. So let's say weekly after school, have a couple of hours of contact within every week, and basically was a bit regular, more than just, and life skills specific. So not only were they meeting regularly, a lot of the context of the program was very geared towards life skills. We found that these programs produced the largest gains in agency scores as compared to very high dosage programs, because we expected, as you would expect, that very high dosage programs, which are programs that have a life skills component, but not very specific. Every day with high contact would have the highest gains. So this was a bit surprising to us, but not unusual that, if, for example, schools that were boarding schools and contacted girls, on a regular basis, which was almost every day with material that's geared towards, improving different aspects of life, not only agency, but also agency is, targeted in this high dosage programs, but the medium dosage programs are very specific to building agency and very regular. So this were some of the programs that we saw the highest dosage. We also saw an effect of age, but only if you're not accounting for the baseline agency score for a girl. So, well, the model didn't account for, when it didn't account for where a girl was starting, we found that the youngest girls had greater gains of agency than older girls, which is not surprising per se, but was interesting to see. But this effect is cancelled when you look at the baseline agency that a girl was starting with. And then I think the other biggest interesting thing we saw, which wasn't quite surprising either, is girls with the lowest quintiles of agency. So we divided the baseline agency scores into 4 quintiles. So lower, medium, a bit, then a third and a fourth category. So the girls with the lowest category of agency also had the highest significant gains of agency. Hence our recommendation that to get, significant gains, we should really target the most vulnerable girls. I'll pass to Aubrey to add where I may have forgotten anything.
No, I think you covered it all well. I would only add, I guess, that on the age question, as Brenda's mentioned, in our early regression models, before we accounted for baseline agency, as she said, we did see that this youngest age category of early adolescence, so girls ages 10 to 13, did seem to have the largest gains in agency. And so that in our early analysis, we thought, oh, perhaps there is a sort of sweet spot for agency related programming, sweet spot of age. However, we did see that those differences according to age were canceled, as Brenda said, when we accounted for baseline agency score in the model. So we can't say anything conclusive about age, but I think we agree that it's an area for further study and an interesting one to consider because, we know agency likely develops naturally in some regard across the life span of adolescence. And so continuing to ask this question of what age group might have the most sort of change capacity for agency, I think is an important one for practice.
Yes, I mean, I think that is an important question is, does age matter, right, for improving girls' agency? And it sounds like it's not very conclusive yet, but I'm glad to hear that that is an important part of what you're looking at and analyzing, because I think that would be a really worthwhile, question if we had more answers to that. I want to circle back, Brenda, maybe with you on the dosage question too. And maybe for the benefit of all of us, we could talk a little bit about what you mean exactly by dosage, because I think there's some really interesting findings. I've just from afar looking at Amplify's work in this in the study over time. And certainly as a investor in programs like this globally, we found some of your findings very interesting on particularly on what it means for high and low dosage programs and which ones may be seen as more or less effective in the study as well. So can you circle back and kind of explain exactly dosage and then what kind of findings you saw there?
Yeah, so we use dosage just as a fancy word to represent program intensity, basically. We had such a diverse range of different programs, and we wanted to try and account for that diversity in one way. And what we did with dosage is ask each of the program staff and program managers just how many contact hours you have with participants over the course of a year. So basically, we divided that into 4 categories, and the low dosage category was any programs that meet participants, let's say a few periods in a year. So there are programs, for instance, that met participants during school holidays. So an intense holiday-based program like 2 weeks, or just blocks of time in a year. And then medium dosage was programs that meet participants a bit more regularly. So let's say weekly after school, maybe once a week, maybe more than that, but just after school. And then the distinction between medium high and high dosage was a bit more nuanced, because medium high dosage was, programs that also regularly meet participants, but it's just not like after school. It's more like specific chunks of time, like a day or 2 that are, dedicated towards agency programming. And then the highest dosage was programs that, so everybody in our highest dosage category fell into a program like a school, a boarding school that has incorporated agency in every aspect of their learning. So every single day of every single of the year, there's some type of agency-related programming that was not just geared specifically to life skills, but in other ways as well. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think it's an important, yes, it is sort of a word we don't always use necessarily in dosage. So I think it's important to and somewhat, counterintuitive, because I think you'd think the high dosage ones and, would always be more effective, and it doesn't necessarily show. It shows that there's a lot of variety in this space and a lot of different ways of being able to work with students and girls that I think would be really interesting to, as you continue your research, to find more about what is the best, most impactful ways that we can be interacting. Maybe both to Aubryn and Brenda, to both of you. I know we've got some good questions coming up, but I'd love for us to turn to sort of how you distill these findings of the research into a few key takeaways that you both are seeing. Are largely for us as practitioners, I think, in this space. Many people who joined us today are working on this themselves in their own communities, and it would be really interesting, I think, for them, if what are the key takeaways that you would like to share with them that your research is highlighting?
Great. I'll start maybe and then pass to you, Brenda. So I think, for me, there are a couple key takeaways for practitioners. So, Brenda shared that we saw that gains in agency were by far the greatest for girls who started with the lowest agency score at baseline. So if we believe that there is a direct relationship between vulnerability and low agency score, so in other words, that the most vulnerable are likely to have low agency, then I think our findings do suggest that programs should really consider targeting the most vulnerable in order to achieve maximum impact. And this, on the one hand, may seem obvious to folks, but I actually think it's often counterintuitive to common practice knowledge and evaluation research, which has often showed that the most vulnerable are the hardest to serve effectively with programming. So, I think takeaway 1 is target the most vulnerable. And then second, we've talked a lot about program structure of our findings, but I think they indicate that, as Brenda's mentioned, sustained medium touch program delivery is the most effective approach to improving girls' agency over this sort of 12-month time span. I will say, our study duration did not extend beyond 12 months, so we can't speak to time periods that are actually longer than that. And to your question earlier, Erin, about high dosage programs, many of the high dosage programs in our AMPLIFY cohort do run programs that are 3 or 4 years long, and we weren't able to sort of capture the maximum impact of that time period in our current study. But certainly our analysis suggests that each additional month of programming above 3 months and up to 12 months yields additional agency gains. And again, programs that meant weekly, for 1 or 2 hours of programming a week. So I think that's interesting, and it gives a lot of weight to the common program model that we see in the girls' education space of life skills programs, sort of structured as these weekly after school or sort of weekend engagements. That seems to be, according to our results, a structure that is effective for improving girls' agency. Brenda, I'll pass to you.
Great. So if you will be able to access our report, we have a very nice, beautiful diagram in there that just illustrates the change from baseline to endline of each of the 4 constructs that or domains of agency that Aubrey spoke about. So those self-beliefs, environmental beliefs, self-governance, and leadership skills. And we see a change in all of this from baseline to endline. But in this line graph, we saw something very interesting. All the other 3, which is self-beliefs, self-governance skills, and leadership skills, all had a very similar trajectory that was, very steep in rise. But then the line that indicated the change in environmental beliefs was more gradual, a bit more flat from baseline to endline, which for us made us have a few questions amongst ourselves. Does it mean then that it's more difficult to change the environmental beliefs, which are the beliefs around gendered norms and the structural constraints of a girl's environment? And we wondered if this was the case, if programs then should concentrate on this aspect of agency, gendered norms and structural constraints, and how much more then would agency change in a girl if we were able to, affect or change this one aspect that we saw to rise, but not as rapidly as the others. So that was also an interesting finding for us. We want to dig deeper into that, I must say, because we didn't have, it wasn't very conclusive. We'd like to be able to get more data and look at this more keenly, but certainly as a preliminary recommendation, that would be one.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. I'm going to switch us a little bit to taking some of the questions from our wonderful listeners. Before we go into more of what's followed up research kind of planned in the future, let's circle back and answer some of these questions, because I know there's some good questions that have been coming in through the Q&A, and please keep them coming. The first 2 questions, I guess I would say, kind of touch on the issue of some of the country contexts and differences. One of them is, can you say more about what has observed between the countries, which led to the account for country differences? And then also, given that your measure of agency was developed with input from practitioners in East Africa, how well do you think your measure will translate to other contexts and regions? So Brenda or Aubrey, happy for either of you to jump in on some of these issues.
I'll let Aubrey go first.
Okay. Well, I would say on the question of country, right? We did see some differences between countries, but our sample wasn't really representative of any one country, and it was skewed. So we had the majority of our participants in programs in Kenya, followed by, I think, Tanzania, Rwanda, and then the smallest sample from Uganda. And so, there are so many things that might impact and influence a girl's agency and her experience of a program. And many of those things can be related to sort of sociocultural context. And so accounting for differences between country was our sort of crude way of leveling the playing field and saying that just taking as much as we could those differences out of the equation. So because our sample wasn't balanced across those countries, meaning we didn't have equal numbers from each country, we actually didn't do a direct country comparison. But that is something that we hope to do in future research. So we'll share a bit more about that as we move forward. And then the other piece of the question was about how widely we believe this tool might be applicable. Well, that's a question that has to be investigated empirically with research. But I think we believe that because this tool was, and particularly the conceptual framework of the tool as these 4 categories of things was developed by practitioners, we think that that overarching conceptual framework has wide applicability. That's, of course, a hypothesis that we have to test. And we are, I think we are investigating whether or not the instrument as it stands has wider applicability in East and Southern Africa. So one of our upcoming studies we'll talk about is actually going to include Malawi in our next round of validation work with the instrument.
Great.
Brenda,
anything else to add on this issue of kind of context and regions and ways of being able to translate the tool to other places?
I would say, I think we could translate it. We would definitely need to empirically do that, as Aubrey has said. But I think for those on the call who are a bit more data oriented or are data geeks, it was very interesting to see that the conceptual framework we went into test with the data held with the data that we got from participants. And even if we just explored the data in itself to give us a structure, it gave us exactly the same structure for different factors, which was interesting to see. So it would be quite, it could be quite interesting to see if data from another region then holds true for the structure of agency as we see it conceptually.
Great, thank you. Well, I know there's another kind of set of questions that are coming up around sort of the characteristics of some programs versus others when it comes to, higher or lower agency scores. For example, peer led versus adult led, rural versus urban, high cost versus low cost, programs with dropout versus programs with none. So, maybe can we start to explore, some of these sort of questions that come up, and I think the best way to do that might be for you first to just talk about a little bit of more some of the settings that you were looking at, and whether any of these types of characteristics were things that you started to see to dig into more, or to look at any differences in.
Brenda, I started last time.
Great. When you read out the question, I thought that would be really great to look into next. what type of like peer-led versus otherwise, and look at how those were. But so full honesty, we didn't really consider the program delivery. So who delivers the program as a part of our analysis or as part of the work we did here. We just tried to find a way to bunch them in terms of contact, but they were sort of mixed. They are programs I know from this analysis that employ both a mentor delivered approach and others that use like a peer delivered approach, but we didn't really examine that. And I would refrain from commenting on it until we are able to look at that more comprehensively, but that's definitely a good point of something to consider in trying to see which kinds of delivery structures are most beneficial in the change of agency. Yeah.
I mean, Brenda, one question that come up specifically was for in-school versus out-of-school girls. Was there anything that came up, or did you look at girls in both contexts? I know that's always an important kind of big question to look at, whether this intervention matters in terms of whether there were you were working with out-of-school girls or in-school girls.
Yeah, there was a mix. Basically, there were girls that were in school and were doing programs either as opt-in from school-based programs, and there were those who are in school, so like the high dosage programs really couldn't opt in or out of the program because the community-based organization that runs the school considers it as a holistic program. And there were those who were teen mothers, so were not really in school, but were part of programming in other ways. We also had some samples of former street children who had been rehabilitated and were in a center. So the population was really diverse in terms of the school, out of school, and the circumstances of the participants. Abrin, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, I think I'm going to jump the gun on sharing a bit about another study upcoming because it will hopefully answer some of these questions. So we are right now working on a combined randomized controlled trial and process tracing study of a particular life skills program and mentoring program in Tanzania run by one of our partners there, GLAMI. And we'll be looking on the experimental side of the study at understanding the relationship between agency and educational outcomes. So is there a causal relationship? Can we say that improving girls' agentic capacity actually causes her to have better educational outcomes? So that's the first piece of the study. And the second piece of the study, which I think answers a bit, hopefully will answer some of these questions about program components, is a qualitative process tracing study where we're going to look at the different program components within this mentoring life skills program and try to draw some conclusions about which components actually lead to gains in agency. And so one of those factors might be, for example, mentoring, right? Role models, would be one of the sort of program elements that we'd be investigating along with many others. So we hope to have some answers to those questions forthcoming in the next few years.
That's very exciting because that has been a long-held question that many of us have wanted to dig more into, is this connection between agency and education. So I know that's very exciting. Before we go into any the kind of next phases of some of the research, I wanted to ask one last question that had come up from several of our practitioners, I think, on the call as well, which is sort of, how is the tool used practically on the ground? Can you help us sort of understand some of the logistics of using this? Because I think we're all interested and excited by these findings, but we also know the reality of what it takes often when you are in a community driven organization and have constraints in terms of how many different opportunities you have to focus on, and how do how is this going to be something that can practically be applied in our work? So can we talk a little bit more about those sort of logistics of how you've gone about using the tool?
Yeah. Okay, I'll start. And so I think for many organizations, any sort of pre-post measure, any type of survey, it can be a heavy lift, right? So this is for most of our organizations in the Amplify network, they take this survey as a hard copy paper survey. They deliver it to girls. It takes between 45 minutes to an hour. We're hoping to shorten it as part of upcoming research. And they then, at the end of the program year, have to locate those same girls who took the survey, deliver the survey again to those girls. And then, of course, in between that, there's a process of inputting the data from the survey into an Excel spreadsheet. And at Amplify, we've tried to automate that work as much as possible. So we've provided training to organizations who are implementing the survey with their girls. But it's a challenge and it's a heavy lift. So we have, as part of our next initiative with this survey, we are hoping to develop a kind of web-based system that will automate data analysis on this survey. So organizations would be able to put their data into this web app and it would do the analysis for them. Right now, Brenda and I do the analysis for most of Amplify's partners organizations. And we'd like to find a way to make that accessible to any organization, regardless of technical capacity, that would like to take it up.
Great. Brenda, I would love to hear your thoughts on sort of this, any practical tips as you've been working with a tool that would be useful for our audience.
I probably would answer this question by giving some of the challenges that the organizations we work with have experienced. And I think some of the smaller organizations that don't have a lot of staff dedicated to M&E have found it probably difficult to be able to link baseline and endline. So to find the same girl and make sure that they get the same survey number. So we do anonymize it to not have names on the survey, because some of the questions within, we're not being self-reported, we think anonymizing it just gives for, more honest answering from the participants. So some of the smaller organizations have had some challenges in being able to just logistically implement, a longitudinal study. But with some support, it's obviously possible. I think if your organization already has a lot of experience in delivering pre-post types of survey, this tool is easy to use. The analysis, on the other hand, might be where the challenge may be, because we are trying to, move away from just aggregating responses. So the tool right now is all the questions are Likert type of responses. And by that, I mean, it's like 5 options of responses that you can answer to every type of question. So we were trying to move away from just statistically aggregating and giving a raw score. So we were trying to weight, provide adequate weighting to every question and see how then that contributes to the overall construct, which is a bit of a statistical undertaking if you particularly don't have the skill. And that's why we thought about, well, what if we make this process automated and had an app that could do this for organizations that don't have somebody on staff to do this? And we are hoping to have this, as an outcome of our next project that is in the works.
Wonderful. Well, I think those practicalities are so important when we are talking about this work, because it is the reality of what we need to do to further it and be able to more widespreadly use tools like this. So thank you for sharing some of those challenges and the way you approach them. And I guess we'll end now and start to move towards our closing by asking if there's any follow-up research planned. You've hinted at different things throughout this talk this morning, and I think we're all really excited to see where Amplify Girls is going and how you're continuing to really work with this community that you've created to focus on girls' agency. So what's next?
Great. We're really excited about what's upcoming. The research that we're talking about today, we're housing under the banner of the Girls Agency Lab, or GAL, as we fondly call her. And our first study that I'll mention is further validation on this survey. So as we talked about a little bit, our sample in our current cohort of partners wasn't balanced across countries. It didn't allow us to do some of the statistical analysis that we know is needed in order to fully validate this instrument, such as investigation of reliability, especially retest reliability. And it didn't allow us enough data from each country to really investigate how widely comparable this tool might be between countries. So our next study, which we're really excited about, working on in collaboration with Echidna Giving, but also one of our technical partners who I think is on the call today, the ICRW, International Center for Research on Women, is to look at the validity of this instrument country by country in East Africa. So in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda, and also Malawi. So expand our current scope a bit. And look at the construct of agency as these 4 dimensions in each country and whether or not it holds, and then look at how widely the tool might be compared between countries and even within countries. So that's the first bit of research that's upcoming. And we are launching that now, and we hope to have results in the next 12 to 18 months. Brenda?
And the other very important study, I think Aubrey already mentioned it, but it's how does agency then affect other outcomes? We started with agency, but it doesn't end with agency, because agency is a pathway towards education, towards better health outcomes, towards economic empowerment. And I think on the session on Tuesday, Linda really spoke about this link between, agency and how it then affects other things. So our next study is a randomized control and process tracing study that Aubrey has mentioned severally. This is going to happen in Tanzania over the course of the next 4 years. So we will follow up participants who join a program from year 1 to year 4. So probably answer all the questions that we had lingering from what about after 12 months, how then does this change? And do we still see gains if we use the same tool over and over, from year 1 to year 4, and what is the change? And yeah, we hope that it will answer so many questions for us and for practitioners as well.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Brenda, and thank you, Aubrey. I know from a Kidney Giving's perspective, it's been a real pleasure to watch the journey that you've been on. It's been incredibly impressive to see the commitment of the community-driven organizations to this work and all that they're learning and sharing with our wider global community. So we're excited to continue to see this work evolve, be along the journey with all of you. And with that, I will hand it back to Anika to continue our program today.
Thank you so much, Erin and Brenda and Dr. Aubrey. That was really amazing. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say we have learned so much, we have understood so much, and we have unpacked so much. Thank you, Erin, for that great session and moderating. That was really perfect, I think. Really brought out the essence of Girls Agency. Now, to further provide contextualization on the development and building of agency, nothing for us without us, I welcome Asimahu Tahiru, who is a GPE youth leader from Northern Uganda. She is currently studying basic education at the University for Development Studies. Asimahu has in-depth knowledge and work experience in social work, specifically youth development and reproductive health education, capacity building, and reporting. Welcome, Asimahu.
Thank you, Anika. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm really inspired by all the previous presented. I am pleased to be here. My name is Asmao, just rightly said by Anika. I am a GP youth leader who advocates for improved investments in girls' education and sexual and reproductive among world leaders. I am coming from the northern part of Ghana, specifically a deprived community where young girls and women are where young girls and women are deprived because they can't talk about what is affecting them. So growing up, I have always had an ambition to empower young girls like me right from primary school. And growing up, my friends, as a young teenager, my friends and I have faced a lot of difficulties in expressing ourselves, which is talking about our what we face, ourselves, because the society we found ourselves was a bit strict to us. We're told to be quiet when important decisions were our bodies. Agency has really helped me to know who I am. So during our periods, we were told it was a taboo to speak about menstruation and our experiences. We were told not to go to school. So in our community where I found myself, when a young girl gets her menses, the only advice we get from our mothers is once a boy touches you, are pregnant. So our mothers was kind of scared to let us go out when we are menstruating because they knew that we may get in contact during those periods, or maybe we may be influenced. And this really affected our academics. It's also affected games and also at school. And silence. development became silence as well. This has really affected, silence was the norm growing up as a young girl from the northern parts of Ghana. So in starting this, my journey I was so curious because other girls took up a leadership step by volunteering at the Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana team lead for reproductive and health education for my community. So coming in contact with other young people with the skill, I was able to inspire other young people and also the community about what they didn't know about.
I think Asimau's network has a bit of a problem. Yes. And so, but she had indicated that, the area that she comes from in Ghana sometimes may have a problem in network. So allow me just to finish her speech to ensure that we get, which she had shared in advance, to ensure that we get what she wanted to tell us. So I will read her speech as follows. I am a Simao coming from the northern part of Ghana, and growing up, my friends and I experienced difficulties in expressing ourselves, and we were told by society that we were meant to be quiet and listen when important decisions were being made. This included decisions about ourselves and our bodies. And during our periods, we were told it was a taboo to speak about menstruation and our experiences. We were told not to go to school or not to speak about it, and it affected our participation in the classroom, during games, and at home. Abuse was silent, suffering was silent, development became silent as well. This affected the early growth of our leadership skills and decision-making because silence was the norm. In starting this journey, I was curious about leadership. So I volunteered at the Planned Parenthood Association of Ghana. I was soon selected as a sisters team leader for reproductive health in my community. I realized that the power to speak, the power to believe in yourself, and the power to change your life lies in a self-actualization journey called agency. Agency enabled me to make better choices. It made me be my own advocate, and it brought me forth to this platform. It made me a better student who is now more aware of the possibilities of the future. It changed my mindset towards hope, towards decision-making and participatory leadership. Organizations like GPE are working with countries to support opportunities for girls to attend school, to learn, and to lead transformational change through the Girls Education Accelerator program. Working with my fellow girls, I have called what we do many names. I have called it mentorship. Sometimes we call it empowerment. Today, with this research, we call it agency. I stand as a young girl to continue advocating on the need for governments and stakeholders to support young girls by investing in their education through building their agency. If provided with agency, girls will be able to develop and define their lives, make decisions that matter to them, and actively participate in public and economic life. So right now, Amplify Girls has given us a tool. They have named our silence, and we ask you all to listen. So that we can create a new way of working with girls for the better. Building agency is critical for the success of girls who are like me. So,
hi, Anika, can I
continue? Yeah, you're back, sorry.
Okay, so I just heard you read out the script. That was awesome. So time has far been spent. So I'll just summarize by saying that I came across this quote by Melinda Gates, where she says that if you invest in a girl or a woman, you are investing in everybody. So I was so inspired because women are the change too. And if women are given this opportunity, they will be able to change the world that we want. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, we
so
can hear you.
so let's give women the opportunity, or young girls the opportunity. Let's give them all the necessary support, education, and also train them capacity building so that they can build agencies. That was our summary reading out. Thank you.
Thank you so
Over
much,
to you,
Asimao.
Anika.
Thank you so much, Asimao. That was amazing. That was brilliant. We will, of course, have your speech uploaded onto our website as well as part of the recording that will be shared. I just want to ensure that I have everybody on the same page moving forward. A few things that Amplify Girls would like to ensure that we do, to ensure that we do not lose the momentum in this conversation. In the link, we will have, in the chat, sorry, we will have a link to the Amplify Girls Agency Stakeholder Working Group that will be meeting monthly to mobilize and galvanize action and resources towards Girls Agency. In case you or your organization would like to join, please check the chat right now. The link has been posted. This will also be shared in our email action after this. To everyone who has registered. In addition, the first conversation we're going to have on Girls Agency will be on the 11th of October. That is the International Day of the Girl. And here we will listen to girls talking about agency in their own words. It's important that we contextualize Girls Agency in the space in which they see it and how they'll be able to understand it. So this will allow us practitioners ensure that as we take on Girls Agency, we're able to understand Girls Agency from their perspective as well. As Brenda and Aubrey mentioned, we have launched the Girls Agency Lab, and we will be, of course, looking at organizations, community organizations that would like to take part in the Girls Agency Lab. So in the chat right now will be the link towards registering for evaluation. Since this is a quantitative study, there is going to be a rigorous exercise in the selection of organizations for the Girls Agency study. Please look at the chat right now. The link has just been posted. Please fill in your organization if you'd like to be part of that research study, and we'll be happy to take you through the evaluation process. All in all, thank you, everyone. We are just 2 minutes over our time today, but we are grateful for everybody who has been able to join. And we hope that we will meet again on the 11th of October, sorry, to listen to our girls. Thank you for joining, and do have a good evening.